Hello and welcome to the Tech Club. We've put together a very accessible build for new players to begin tanking in New World, so we're going to show you that today. This build is designed especially for beginner players, beginners to New World, beginners to tanking, for the New World MMO. People who might not yet have obtained the experience required or the gear that's needed for endgame tanking, but want to progress towards it. This is not an end game build, it's not designed for doing mutation 3 expeditions, it's designed to give people the safety they need, to give people the chance to learn and practice and develop their ability as a tank so that they can move forward in the future to becoming more of an optimized tank. With this build you're going to get high defense, survival, easy AoE aggro of enemies, safety in difficult situations. It's going to help you obtain valuable experience. The gear required is easy to obtain. It's going to get you at least through normal expeditions. It's going to get you through potentially level 1 mutation. And you could also do level 2 mutation as well if you really wanted to. One thing to remember about New World tanking is it's very different from other MMORPG games. The game is designed in a way where blocking for long periods of time is not possible. It's a thing that you have to do very infrequently. You're actually expected to spend more time dodging, evading attacks and do damage than you are like taking hits, blocking and being defensive. In New World, you only have 3 abilities to use for each weapon. You can equip 2 weapons, so that's 6 abilities in total. So you need to time and spread out your ability usage, especially as a tank when using taunt skills, because once a skill is used, it often goes onto a long cooldown and can't be used again. So we're going to take all of these things into account to provide you with this really good beginner tank build. So for starters, we're going to look at the attributes for a beginner tank. And the most important thing that you're going to need on this at this level of tanking is 300 into Constitution. So we have to think about this. This is going to include your gear, your food, and your attributes as a total. So you need to make sure when you are applying your attributes, you've got to make sure you've got your gear equipped, you've got your food used, and then you input your attributes, because that's when you're going to know if you've got the right numbers. So 300 Constitution is super important. If you wanted that additional bit of safety, 350 Constitution is acceptable as well, because you will get some extra damage reduction by doing that. But the most important one is for 300 points, getting grit with basic attacks. This means that you don't have to permanently block. You can do light attacks, you can do heavy attacks. You're not going to get knocked flying by bosses when you're doing that. So it's really important. Now, an optional thing you can do is you can put 25 points into focus. This isn't essential. You can even put 50 points if you want to, but it is going to make it a little bit more difficult to maintain aggro of enemies because you're going to have lower threat. For 25 points, you get 5% ability cooldown, but by having 50 points, you get 10% increased incoming healing. So there are benefits to adding a few points into focus for those 2 perks. Once you've done all of that, you put everything else into strength, and then that is going to be how you set up. So some of the most important Constitution buffs, you've got obviously the 10% physical armor when you're at 50% or more health. That's at 50 points. You get 10% more max health at 100 points. 200 points, you've got physical and elemental armor is increased by 10%. And like I say, at that 350 point mark, if you wanted to, you get 10% damage reduction when you have grit. And your 300 point one is giving you the grit. So it's obviously a very good option, but you don't have to take it. 350 points into Constitution isn't necessary, so that's optional. Okay, if we take a look at weapons that you're going to want to use for a beginner tank build. So my suggestion for this build is going to be a sword and shield combined with a hatchet. Now you have got the option of using a flail and shield instead of a hatchet if you wanted to, but the hatchet is going to be slightly better in this situation. So when played correctly, you'll be virtually unkillable with this combination, making it the best for beginners. And you'll have access to 2 really good AoE taunt skills when you're using the sword and shield and the hatchet. Sword and shield is still super strong with the Rise of the Angry Earth expansion. Many people have switched over to Flail. The Flail is really strong because it gives you some defensive buffs, some benefits, and it allows you to maintain a lot of weaken on enemies as well, which reduces the damage they do to you and your group. But the Flail is not as strong defensively as a sword, so I don't think you really want to replace it for a beginner tank instead of the sword and shield. So I would replace it for the hatchet if you're going to use it. Using a hatchet for a secondary weapon though is good because you gain access to a really good AoE taunt skill, but the most integral part is the Defy Death passive. You do get the weaken debuff as well with a hatchet, but not quite as good as it is with obviously the flail. You're also able to deal a decent amount of damage output with a hatchet. That's good for you as a tank and good for maintaining threat. But the Defy Death passive is really a critical part here for a beginner, because the whole point is you maybe don't know how to do the mechanics of an expedition. By having the hatchet, it's going to give you the chance to die but not actually die. Defy Death is a mega strong passive for somebody who wants to learn the mechanics but doesn't want to be causing a detrimental impact for the group, and that's the most important part. You don't want to keep dying, you don't want to keep causing your group difficulties because you've died, because you don't know what you're doing. You need to make sure that you've got this passive, and that is going to help you survive when you do make those mistakes. And this build is going to give you a really, really strong room for error. So if we look at our beginner tank sword and shield setup, for the gem on your weapon, you have to use a pristine carnelian. There is no other option, because this is going to give you a huge amount of threat. So you need to use this 300% more threat. Without this, it's going to be very difficult to maintain aggro of any enemies. For your weapon perks, one of the most important weapon perks is Refreshing Move. Every time you do a light and heavy attack, it reduces your active weapon cooldown. And the reason why this is important is by doing a light or a heavy attack, reduces your cooldown so you can cast your abilities faster, so then you can stay alive longer and you're able to do your abilities much, much faster. For another weapon perk, I think Life Stealing is a really good one for the sword, because when you are sat there on your sword weapon, it's going to heal you for 7.1% of the damage that you deal potentially. So that's really good because you're getting reduced cooldowns from the Refreshing Move, you're getting Life Stealing, giving you health back. And then for your final perk, something like Hated or Enchanted, this one's more up to you. Kind of take a look at what you like the look of, but I think Hated might be helpful for a beginner, although it's not essential, it's not something you absolutely need. Or Enchanted is really good as well for the light and heavy attacks, because you are going to be doing frequent light and heavy attacks. They're going to deal more damage. For the shield, it's really critical to make sure you've got good perks on your shield. So Fortifying Shield Rush is the most important perk that you need on your shield, followed by Sturdy. Sturdy is going to reduce the amount of stamina it takes to block an attack, and Fortifying Shield Rush on a tower shield is going to give you Fortify, which increases armor by 35% for 6 seconds. So this is absolutely huge. The perfect shield for this kind of setup would include Sturdy Energy as well, which gives you increased stamina recovery when you go below 30% stamina. And Shield Defense is another strong one because it's going to give you 5% damage reduction. Now, when we look at the actual build, this isn't the most optimized build that you can use. On my website, thetankclub.com, we've got a more optimized version of a sword and shield build for when you are more experienced. But for a beginner player, this is my build suggestion. So first of all, we've got Shield Rush. And as I mentioned before, we've got the Fortifying Shield Rush perk on our tower shield. So this is one of the first things you do when you go into combat. You hit Shield Rush, it's going to give you a huge amount of Fortify. It weakens the enemy thanks to the passive, and it's a really, really strong starter point. We've then got Defender's Resolve, which is an AoE taunt. So Shield Rush is not a taunt, but it does 100% weapon damage. So it's a good threat generator, it's a good threat builder. It also applies the weaken debuff. But then Defender's Resolve reduces your incoming damage from attackers by 30%. It also taunts enemies, and you don't have to hit anything, you don't have to do anything. It's like an aura area taunt. So you cast it and everything will be taunted. But you always want to try and make sure you've got initial threat before you taunt enemies, because if you lose taunt, when your taunt expires after 8 seconds, if you haven't generated enough threat, they're all going to run off. So the idea is you go in with that Shield Rush to start with, hit your Defender's Resolve after a couple of seconds, and then you're going to have threat, and then you're going to have a taunt. Now once you've done that, you're then going to use Reverse Stab. Reverse Stab is really strong because of the passive that you get with this. So if you get the second passive, Tactician, it's going to reduce the cooldowns of your sword and shield skills by 25%. So Shield Rush and Defender's Resolve, the cooldowns are going to be reduced by 25%. Now Reverse Stab isn't the best option. Whirling Blade would be the better skill to use, but for a beginner, you're probably going to be panicking, maybe casting skills at the wrong time. Having Reverse Stab there so you can reuse Defender's Resolve quickly, or so you can use Shield Rush. Shield Rush is a massive, massive defensive survival skill. Defender's Resolve, a massive defensive survival and taunt skill. So you need to have those two more than anything. So Reverse Stab is going to help you do that. So Sword and Shield is a great benefit to you as a tank. You can pretty much become immortal when you play it correctly. This is why, as a beginner, it's one of the most essential weapons to use. As you've seen already, the passives are mostly in the defender side. When you do try to optimize, you actually put more into the Swordmaster side because you are looking to push out more damage and provide more benefits to your group, and the Swordmaster side does that. Whereas the defender side is more about giving you benefits as an individual. So when you are learning, go with more into the defender, take these perks, and you're going to get good survival, better sustain, all those kind of good things. To make the most use of a sword, it's recommended that you use an amulet with the Fortified perk. Now this is going to stack nicely with the things that we've already mentioned. So if you use Fortify, it's going to increase the duration of Fortify by 34%. So you do a Shield Rush, it procs Fortifying Shield Rush perk for 6 seconds, but then it gets a 34% longer duration thanks to the Fortified Amulet. And then, because you're using Reverse Stab and you're reducing the cooldown of Shield Rush, you're also light attacking with your Refreshing Move perk on your sword. You're able to do Shield Rush again, and the cooldown will be much shorter. So you can almost cast Shield Rush on cooldown, on the Fortify cooldown, to give yourself huge survival. So how to use the Sword and Shield. So you always instigate combat with a Shield Rush because this will generate good amounts of initial threat. It'll proc Fortifying Shield Rush perk on your shield, make you very defensively strong. You always use Defender's Resolve after that to taunt all enemies in the surrounding area, but to also further buff your defense and incoming healing. Once both of those skills are on cooldown, use Reverse Stab to proc the Tactician passive, which reduces your cooldowns by 25%, so you can use the previous skills much sooner. Light attack as much as possible. When doing so, your cooldowns get reduced, which is essential for your survival. You'll also have better stamina sustain for blocking and dodging. Cast Shield Rush as often as possible. Every time you use it, you weaken the enemies by 20% for 10 seconds, and you gain Fortify, which buffs your armor by 35% for 6 seconds. Ensure not to block permanently. Each time you block an attack, remember, heavy after a heavy. This is the one thing you need to remember. When you block a hit from the enemy, follow it up by heavy attacking back to help you regenerate stamina. So when our boss is doing a heavy attack, block the heavy attack, and then you do a heavy attack back to the boss. That is your window of opportunity where the damage that you're going to take isn't super high. Okay, moving on to the Hatchet. So for a Hatchet, you're going to want to use, again, a pristine cut carnelian gem. For the perks, Refreshing Torrent is what I suggest for the most important perk on a Hatchet. This is going to reduce all Hatchet cooldowns by 9% for each attack of Raging Torrent. And this is going to mean that you can obviously cast your skills much sooner once again. For a beginner, Life Stealing would be decent, but other perks like Thwarting Strikes, Keenly Empowered, anything kind of damage based is going to be good for your Hatchet. So the main skills you want to use are Berserk. Now Berserk is a taunt skill. It's similar to Defender's Resolve in a way that you don't have to hit anything, you don't have to do anything. It's just going to cause an area, AoE, aura, taunt. So everything is just going to get taunted. So it works really well because especially for ad pulls, you might get through an ad pull too fast that Defender's Resolve hasn't refreshed. So then you could use Berserk instead. Maybe you've got an ad pull that takes too long. So you go in, you've done your Shield Rush and your Defender's, but then the ads are still not dead. So it takes a while. So then you can switch to your other bar. You can cast Berserk so you can then pull them back in and don't lose aggro. And it's also going to increase your damage and give you other benefits as well. We're also going to be using Raging Torrent, like I say, with the Refreshing Torrent perk on the weapon to reduce those cooldowns. Then we've got Infected Throw, so you leap into the air and throw a hatchet that deals weapon damage. It inflicts disease and weaken to your target for 10 seconds. It's got a really short cooldown of 15 seconds, but when you're wearing sort of refreshing gear, you've got things that are reducing your cooldowns, you're going to be able to cast this virtually on cooldown. So you'll be able to recast this every 10 seconds to make sure you're maintaining a really high uptime on that weaken. The huge benefit of using a hatchet for a beginner are that Berserk gives you that second AoE taunt along with some lifesteal. You get a lifesteal in there as well. Combining Raging Torrent with Refreshing Torrent perk means you'll be able to reduce the hatchet cooldown super quickly. The most integral part of the hatchet is Defy Death passive, which means you can avoid dying, and it gives you the opportunity to learn, make mistakes without having a detrimental impact on your group. So Defy Death, when you receive lethal damage, you avoid death, become invulnerable for 0.5 seconds, you restore 500 HP plus 50% of your base health upon activation, and it's got a 60-second cooldown, so you can essentially die once every 60 seconds, but not die. So the only time it's going to be a problem is if you obviously proc this, and then you come back to life, and then you instantly take a hit and die. That's the only time it's going to be an issue. So really good way to actually survive. You still offer some group support with Weaken from Infected Throw, which also allows you to range aggro enemies, but all of these benefits, you will lose out on some crowd control and rend. So how to use the hatchet. So you instigate combat with Infected Throw, which can be done from range, and it does a good amount of damage and also applies Weaken and Disease. Once you reach the enemy, you use Berserk to gain Taunt and Lifesteal. You hit enemies with Raging Torrent for damage and to proc your Refreshing Torrent perk. You should regularly do a heavy attack, which will give you 15% Fortify, and when an enemy is under 30% health, your heavy attacks will do 20% more damage. Use plenty of light attacks. 3 of them in a row will give you Empower, and crit light attacks generate stamina, helping you to sustain blocking and dodging more easily. Playing this build, you will lose the utility of a Warhammer or a Spear, So that is something you'll need to switch to once you've learned and understood the fundamentals of New World tanking, and you've got everything under control. You've really got to learn those fight mechanics. For a beginner though, your priority, your main priority as a beginner tank doing content for the first time is maintaining aggro and staying alive. If you can do those two things as a beginner, then that's a really good start. But as soon as possible, as soon as you're comfortable, you need to use a Warhammer instead of the Hatchet, because it's just going to give you so many more group benefits. It's going to crowd control enemies. You can do multiple crowd control. You can go in, you can hit them, you can stun them, you can stagger them, you can immobilize them, you can apply lots of debuffs like rend and weaken, which is going to really help your group. So as soon as possible, you need to switch to that. But in these early stages of your tanking journey, it's not required or essential. Now, if you did want to use the Flail, you can do. Again, you'd want to be using Refreshing Move and Lifesteal as the perks. Cut Carnelian Gem, Pristine. It has to be the Pristine. I know the Pristine is more expensive, but it gives you such a huge amount of threat generation, 300%, that it is needed. Now, the abilities that you'd use here would be Arcane Smite, mainly because it's going to imply impairment stacks, and it does a decent amount of threat generation with 130% weapon damage to all targets, so it's an AoE kind of target. You've got some really nice perks attached to that skill as well, including a really nice Fortify. We've then got Barrage, which I don't believe is a great skill, but you might need it if you are a beginner player. So it's a taunt skill, it's a gap closer. So you're going to leap in and you're going to hit an enemy with your flail. And the problem with this skill is it does miss. When you're in close combat, when you stood next to a boss and you're activating it, so not at the start of the fight, at the start of a fight it's really easy. The problem is when you stood next to a boss and you're trying to reactivate it, you've got to press it and then press it again immediately, so it instantly causes the skill. But often you'll clip through and miss the enemy still, even when you do that. So I don't like it, but it's going to be useful for a beginner because of the additional taunt. With Barrage as well, you do get Fortify in there as well, so you've got two sources of Fortify by using a Flail. So one side in the Cleric, one side in the Bastion. So basically, you've got no excuse not to maintain 100% uptime of Fortify by combining a Flail with a Sword and Shield. The last skill would be Warding Bludgeon, so you spin and do a leap attack. It does AoE damage, it does AoE taunt. It's an AoE taunt skill, so it's going to hit everything and it's going to taunt it all. It's going to apply Reinforced Fortify to self and all allies, increasing armor by 50% for 8 seconds or until 3 hits are taken. And the real strength of the Flail is its ability to apply lots of weakening stacks. So every single passive and perk and skill where it says impairment, this is a stack of weaken. So you want to keep stacking up these impairment stacks. The more of them that you stack up, the more weaken that you apply. And the longer duration you're keeping of that weaken, and that means that the enemies are doing less damage to both you and the rest of the members of your group. So how to use the Flail? So you want to use Barrage to do a gap closer to the enemy, and taunt and provide the group Fortify buff. So it's actually a group Fortify buff that you gain here. Next, you do a heavy attack within 3 seconds to gain one of the impairment stacks, which is applying that weaken debuff. You place down Arcane Smite to apply another impairment stack. You're going to get Lifesteal for your group and some other sources of Fortify and things like that. Then you get a heavy attack again within 3 seconds to get another impairment stack. Use Warding Bludgeon to apply an AoE taunt, while also giving yourself the Reinforced Fortify, buffing a nearby ally as well and applying more impairment stacks. Heavy attack again within 3 seconds after that skill to gain another impairment stack. And just ensure, again, not to block permanently. Each time you block an attack, heavy after a heavy. When you block a hit, do a heavy attack back to the boss, and it helps you regain stamina more easily. And obviously when you are using this, you're going to be using the same shield. So it kind of works because you're using the shield with your sword already, and then you're using the shield with a flail. One of the perks on the shield will be useless, because obviously Fortifying Shield Rush only works and only benefits you when you use the sword skill Shield Rush. So that is wasted when using a flail and when using a sword as well, with a shield. But in this case, it's better to just go with that anyway. With the flail, outside of this rotation of abilities and heavy attacks, you don't really have much incentive to stay on this weapon. You gain benefits by blocking or being hit, so your best bet is to run through your abilities on both weapons, focus on being active with your other weapon, and then when you need to turtle up, or when you're taking a lot of damage, or you're low on health, or you need those defensive benefits, make sure you're on your flail, with all your buffs and everything active from your sword and shield as well. So this is a beginner tank build, so we'll assume that you don't have access to the perfect, best in slot gear. There are plenty of farmable gear sets and items that you can use even as a beginner. So you'll want to be progressing through the main story quest combined with faction missions as you're leveling up, as you're progressing through New World. Faction missions are important because you can instantly gain really good gear that you can use for all content up to Mutation 2 expeditions. Only when moving on to the M3 expeditions will you require better gear that's all 700. You'll need to increase your rank and collect tokens with your alliance to buy the gold gear score 675 faction gear. And this is the perfect way to get started with tanking in the game. It's also very beneficial to do the Elysian Wilds main story quest. Some of the most easily farmable gear is from the Elysian Wilds, including having access to artifacts which we've put into this build to give you some extra buffs and benefits. When you want to progress onto harder content, it will be essential to optimize your protections, which is when you'll need to collect multiple different shields and amulets that protect you against different damage sources depending on the boss that you're fighting and the fights that you're doing. So this is something you need to look into. And there's a lovely article on my website which shows you the damage of every mutation and what gems you need. It shows you which protections you need for which boss and which protection are available in the game. So check that out over on my website, thetankclub.com. So if we take a look at the gear, now we are going to be wasting one perk within this gear because we're going to be stacking 5 pieces of gear that have refreshing, and refreshing gear can only be stacked 4 times. But we're kind of struggling to put a build together that's easily accessible that doesn't have refreshing on all the body pieces. So the first pieces you're going to want to take are the helmet, the chest, the gauntlets, and the boots from your alliance vendor. These are going to come with constitution, health, refreshing, and enchanted ward. They're going to be in heavy armor, and you want to attach an opal gem to this gear. And this is the most easily accessible gear in the game. And the fact that it all drops with good perks and at 675 makes it truly good for a beginner tank, because you don't have to do anything. You just have to do the quests that everyone has access to, the nice easy quests that you can do with your alliance representative in the town that you want, and just stack everything up and buy this gear. For the legs, we are going to use the attuned leather pants. The reason we're using these is basically because it's going to give you a lot of extra stats. So we get Magnify, which gives you plus 40 to your highest attribute. You get Well-Rounded, which gives you 10 to all other attributes. We get Refreshing on there, which is the one that we didn't really want, and then Elemental Aversion. Now, I haven't attached like the random perk, so you can apply a random perk by upgrading this yourself, but I'm not going to talk about that now because you're not going to be using this forever. Like, this is something we might drop later on as we're progressing. As you get onto the harder content, you might not want to use these anymore, so don't waste your materials upgrading it. Just keep it with the 4 perks for now. For the amulet, I've tried to go with one that is going to give you fortified and some other kind of benefits that we can get. So the syncretic amulet is the one that I've gone for. Now, you can get this in the Brimstone Sands area. You want to go and do the Heli Elite Zone, and you can get this amulet from any of the enemies in that zone. This is going to come with the Magnify, the Alchemist's Reprieve, which improves your healing from potions by 10%, which isn't amazing, but this is one of the most easily accessible amulets. The really important perk here is Fortified. So Fortify you apply lasts 34% longer. That's why I've took this amulet. So we've got lots of options of gaining Fortify within this build. You've obviously got the Fortifying Shield Rush. You've got the 2 different Fortifies from the Flail. When you do a heavy attack with your hatchet, you get a 15% Fortify. So there's lots and lots of different Fortify accessibility within the build. So what we're going to make sure we're doing is, by having this perk Fortified, you will be able to gain those benefits for longer, meaning you'll keep a much higher uptime, meaning you can survive for longer. Now, there's a 19% chance that this will drop with the max health perk on it as well, and that's ideally the one you want to get. So it'll give you 7% more max health, and having more max health is really crucial. So with this patch, because it's really easy to get more max health and there's a lot of damage in the game, stacking up your max health is really, really helpful and a really good option as well. Now, the second piece of jewelry, something that I find to be a really good survival tool. You might not have access to this, so if you don't have access to it, what you're looking for is you're looking for a ring that has Leeching, Hearty, and Enfeebling. I'm personally going with the Blood Drinker. Now, this is an artifact piece of jewelry, but it is so strong that it's one that I think you've really got to use if you can. Now, it comes from a Mutation 1 Starstone, and this is, in my opinion, one of the easier M1s to do. So even if you're not super knowledgeable about how to do this dungeon, doing Mutation Level 1 isn't insanely difficult. And if you can get it, it's just really strong. You've got Ghoul's Harmony, which reduces your damage by 25%, but you gain 25% lifesteal. From my testing in various different levels of mutation and different expeditions, that minus 25% damage didn't really seem to be actually 25% damage. I didn't lose 25% of all my damage. It wasn't causing me difficulties with threat and taunt. So it's mega strong to get 25% increased healing, because sometimes you might not get enough healing from your healer. If you're in a random group, you never know what you're going to get. So being able to rely on yourself a little bit with having Ghoul's Harmony, having the Leeching perk in there as well, the Hearty that's going to give you more max stamina, and then Enfeebling, which is going to increase the duration of your weakens by 32%. So every time you do a shield rush, the weaken's going to increase in duration. When you're using your Flail, you've already got lots of abilities stacking up that gives you weaken, but it's going to last longer. Even with your Hatchet, you've got 10% weaken when you do infected throw, so it's going to be really useful to extend the duration to maintain it for a longer period of time. And this is just the tricky part, so finding a ring that's got those similar perks, it might just mean that you've got to go and farm some elite areas. Maybe you won't be able to get the 3 main perks, Leeching, Hearty, and Enfeebling, but just get the best piece of jewelry that you can with the majority of those perks on it. For the earring, we've gone with the Spore Light earring. This is obtained by named enemies in the Elysian Wilds area. The reason I've gone with this one is mainly for the Despised perk. So when you are quite new to tanking, you might struggle with threat generation, you might struggle with keeping aggro of enemies, so we're trying to boost that threat generation, and Despised on your earring is a really good piece to have. Nimble is also a really good piece because it gives you 10% increased stamina regeneration rate, so every time you drop your block, your stamina is going to increase in duration, it's going to regen 10% faster. The tricky part is getting the final perk, which is Refreshing Toast. Now this is a random drop piece of gear. So you might not get it with Refreshing Toast, but obviously if you are in the Elysian Wilds area, maybe you're doing the quests, maybe you're killing bosses, you're doing different things there, you might get it with the Refreshing Toast perk. If you do, this is going to be a great piece of gear, but the first 2 ones are the main ones. If you can drop it in for Refreshing Toast, perfect. If not, then don't worry about it too much. For your sword, we've got the Tai Longsword, and this one drops from named enemies in Ebb and Scale Reach. So especially if you go to some of the higher areas where you've got the elite enemies in Ebb and Scale Reach, you're going to be able to get this sword. The reason we've gone for this sword, it's not the perfect longsword, but it's the easiest one to farm that's got the perks that we need, and it's got Refreshing Move on there. It's going to have a random perk as well. If you can get that as life stealing, that would be absolutely perfect. And since we don't have any rend application on this build because we're not using a Warhammer or a spear, we're also not using Whirling Blade. So every time you heavy attack, you're going to apply rend for 7 seconds, which is going to reduce the target's on by 16%, and it's got a 12-second cooldown. So you're going to get 5 seconds of downtime potentially if you were to cast this on its 12-second cooldown, but we are still able to apply some rend, and because you're going to want to be doing regular heavy attacks like we mentioned, heavy after a heavy, so you're going to be doing that to maintain your stamina anyway. But you're also going to get the benefit of that Trenchant Rend just so you can help your group a little bit with more Rend, because you're not going to be giving any from any other sources. So this kind of covers you for the fact that you're not giving it from the usual places, the usual sources of Rend aren't there. So just by doing a heavy attack, you're going to get at least a little bit. For your offhand, unfortunately, there is no easily named pieces to go and pick up. They just don't exist. If you want to get kind of a good shield, they're in the really hard content, some of them even in mutation level 3. Now ideally you want a shield that's going to have Fortifying Shield Rush, Shield Defense, Sturdy, and Sturdy Energy. Those would be the perks that you're looking for. Just make sure when you are running around killing stuff, you're wearing a sword and shield. If you're wearing a sword and shield, you've always got a chance that it's going to drop with at least a couple of those perks. But the main ones that you want to have, you need to have Fortifying Shield Rush and you need to have Sturdy. So if you've got a shield that's got those 2 perks on, that is the main priority. If you can get Shield Defense and Sturdy Energy as well, then that would be perfect. But if you can't get that, then just focus on getting one with Sturdy and Fortifying Shield Rush to start with. For the main hand backup, so your Hatchet, if you are using a Hatchet, we've got Fury, and this comes with Refreshing Torrent and Hated. The Hated isn't great, but again, we are limited on the Hatchets that we can obtain, so it's not easy to obtain Hatchets. And to get this, you're going to need to kill the Overgrown Guardian in the Elysian Wilds. So again, the Elysian Wilds area is providing useful here for another gear drop. If you can get it to drop with the life stealing perk as the final perks, obviously it comes with the set perks of Hated and Refreshing Torrent. But if you can get the final one as life stealing, then this would actually be pretty decent. Like I say, Hated isn't essential, especially if you're using the Despised piece of earring and you're using the Carnelian gems. You shouldn't need it, but that is the best one to go for. It's the easiest one to farm for now, so give that one a try. Now, if you are going to use a Flail, the most easily accessible one is the Odo, and it's also probably the best as well. So you've got Odo's Punishment, you deal 20% more damage to stunned foes. That's not the most important thing, but it works on both weapons. So even if you weren't, even if you're not using the Flail, when you're on your sword, you're still going to do that 20% more damage to stunned enemies. The strong part is the Odo's defense. So on block, you heal for 5% base health. So you're on your Odo, you're on your flail bar, you block, you heal, which is a nice little bonus. You get life stealing, which heals you for 7.1% of the damage you deal, and you get refreshing move. So these are basically the perks that we want on the sword, but in a much more easily obtainable way, because this is an artifact item. It drops from Vanash, which is a boss in the Elysian Wilds area once again, so it's very accessible and quite easy to farm. Now, for more information on tank gear, please see the New World Tank Gear Guide. There's a video both on YouTube, and we've got a written guide with more options over on my website. Now we're moving on to Heartrunes, and a Heartrune might not be accessible for you, but you can kind of obtain them fairly easily now with the kind of regular story mode, shall we say, expeditions. And the reason why you want to get this particular one is because it gives you an emergency button. So you press it, you activate it in an emergency situation, and it's going to be really, really strong. So for a beginner, gaining that safety and survival, when you're on low health, hitting this is going to be super strong, and it's the Heartrune of Stone form. To obtain this, you're going to have to kill Chardis in the Lazarus expedition. In my opinion, Lazarus is one of the easiest expeditions in the game, and so you shouldn't have too much trouble getting through it. You can upgrade this as well. So once you've obtained the regular version of this, so the minor Heartrune of Stone form, like the minor Heartrune isn't amazing, so cleanses all crowd control debuffs, grants immunity to both stagger and crowd control debuffs for 5 seconds. So it's not anything special at its base level. Now, when you upgrade it to purple, you're going to get fortifying forms. So you gain fortify on activation, increasing armor by 10%. When you then go for the second upgrade up to gold, you want to go for the stalwart Heartrune of Stone form. What this will do is you gain that fortify still, but you'll also heal for 75% Heartrune damage per second while active, and reduces outgoing damage by 20%. So what happens is, if you can upgrade it to gold, upgrade it to the stalwart Heartrune, and then you pretty much go from almost death to full health. So it's a great way to survive if your healer's dead, or maybe you're not getting enough healing, maybe you're taking some big damage, maybe you make a mistake and miss a mechanic and you get hit. You proc this, you gain fortify, you heal pretty much up to full health, and it's a really strong option. And then finally, we're moving on to consumables. So when you are using consumables, there's lots and lots of benefits here to helping you with more damage and survival. So firstly, we've got food. So you need to use whatever food is relevant to you for your individual needs based upon your gear and attributes. For me to get the attributes that I wanted, I did have to use strength food. You've also got foods that give you constitution, but you want to do whichever one is the strongest food. So plus maybe some of the most accessible and cheap food is like the 40 con food. So the roasted rabbit with seasoned vegetables is a pretty cheap and accessible one. Banana bread is probably the best strength food. You got 48 strength for 50 minutes. So it's a really good way. That I needed to use that myself to balance out my own attributes. So you might want to try that one. So yeah, there's a few different foods. Take a look at those. You've also got honing stones, and you use one at the start of an expedition. It gives you an increase of damage throughout the whole expedition, which is necessary because it helps you generate threat. It helps you maintain aggro of enemies. There's no reason not to use one, even as a tank, because it's easy, additional, free, extra damage. Even if you can't afford to buy or craft the most stronger versions, the powerful one, which gives you that 7% increased damage, just using sort of a common stone, which is pretty cheap to make, it's going to give you a 5% damage bonus for 30 minutes. So always use a honing stone when you go into an expedition to give you that nice boost of damage. We've then got potions. Now, potions don't share a cooldown. So you've got different potions you can use at different times. So you've got, for example, the infused health potion. You should use these for emergency situations to give you health. So you're going to get a nice chunk of health, and that's going to help with your survival. You've then also got infused regeneration potions. So you should use infused regeneration potions kind of on cooldown when you're in combat, especially on boss fights, because it keeps like ticking constant healing. And especially if you've got life stealing in there, and you've got the jewelry that we mentioned where you've got all this incoming health and this life steal, and you've got regen potions going, you're going to have a lot of health coming in. So you don't have to 100% rely on your healer, because the healer might just not be good enough, or maybe they're inexperienced as well. You just don't know what you're going to get. So this gives you some self-survivability. One of the important parts next is you can also use an infused ward potion. Now, depending on which content you're going into, you use the ward potion. If you can't afford the infused ones, use a weaker one. But when you use an infused ward potion, you'll get 10% damage absorption against a specific enemy type for 40 minutes. So you just pop one at the start of an expedition, and it's going to protect you throughout. So you need to go and look at my ward and protection guide over on thetankclub.com, which tells you every expedition and which type of ward potion you're going to need to protect yourself against that. So there's some that are going to be ancients. So Lazarus, you'll need an ancient potion. You pop it at the start, and then your survival will increase throughout. You've got Angry Earth, Beast, Corrupt, Human, and Lost. So you just use this potion, and then you're good to go. So these have, in a way, replaced the need for ward gear, because you can just use one, and it lasts for the whole dungeon now, which is really, really good. And you can use all three of those potions all at the same time. So there's no... Each potion's got its own individual cooldown, but they don't interfere with the cooldowns of each other. Next, we've got trophies, and you can place one of each trophy per house, and you can own 3 houses. So if you're going, again, you need to look at the Ward and Protection guide to see what enemy type it is. So let's just say Lazarus again. If you do Lazarus, you would need Ancient Ward Potions. You could then also slot Ancient Combat Trophies. And what that's going to do is increase your damage against ancient enemies. And if you've got 3 houses, you can go and put one of these Ancient Combat Trophies, one in each house, so you can gain 9% damage against ancients. If you just use the minor combat trophies that you can pick up literally for nothing, 9% damage for free. Combine that with the Honing Stone damage we've already got, there's absolutely no reason not to be using them. So it's just free damage. So just get these popped into your house, depending on which expedition you're doing, and it's going to be really, really good to increase your... It's going to help with threat, it's going to help with aggro, because the more damage you're doing, the more threatening you are, the more enemies are going to stick to you. And then finally, we've got kind of coatings. So they're the same as, they're like the opposite, shall we say, of infused ward potions. So ward potions protect you against a certain enemy type. Coatings are something you put on your weapon, which do more damage to that specific enemy type. So you can do the same thing. So if you're in an Ancients expedition, you apply the weapon coating to your main weapon, and then you're going to do more damage to that enemy type because you've got the coating. So definitely use those as well. And then we've got Incense, Oak Flesh Balm, and Gemstone Dust. In really, really high damage situations, it can be good to have these 3 things. Incense is going to be a good way to protect your overall resistance to different afflictions, such as poison, disease, bleed, frostbite, curse, and blight. So if you use Incense, it's going to protect you for 50 minutes against those things. So that can be useful if you know that there's going to be those effects in a specific dungeon. Oak Flesh Balm and Gemstone Dust are specific damage absorptions. They don't last very long, so they're not perfect. They might last 20 seconds. If you use the weakest ones, the common Oak Flesh Balm, for example, it's going to give you 17% physical damage absorption for 20 seconds or after receiving 9 hits. So you're going to burn through them pretty quickly if you're using them on cooldown. So I don't really suggest using Oak Flesh Balm and then Gemstone Dust as a beginner, but it can be good to think about them, but you've got to know what damage types you're taking. So Oak Flesh Balm is good against Strike, Slash, or Thrust. Gemstone Dust is good against Arcane, Fire, Acid, Lightning, Void, and Nature or Ice. So if you know the damage type, you could use a few to help keep yourself alive if you do hit some difficult moments. So that is my beginner tank build for New World. If you've got any questions or you need to know anything, you can go and check out my website, thetankclub.com, or join us on the Tank Club Discord. We've got a very active New World community of tanks now, which is really, really good. So you can ask questions to other players, to myself. We'll answer them, we'll try and help you, and that's a great place to go if you're looking for any specific tank-related information. Thank you very much to our YouTube subscribers and our Patreons for all the support, helping keeping the Tank Club running. Very much appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.